Imagine a fairground, noise, laughter, food stalls, children on shoulders. Now imagine that the main attraction is a man about to be hanged. For centuries in Britain, that wasn't shocking, that was normal. Public executions were not accidental, they were designed. For the state, hanging someone in public wasn't primarily about killing the criminal, it was about sending a message. The scaffold was a stage, and the condemned body was a prop. The lesson was simple. This is what happens when you break the rules. In a world without mass media, executions were the loudest form of communication available. No newspapers could reach everybody. No posters could scare like a body swinging in the wind. Justice had to be seen to be believed. And importantly, it had to be felt. Fear was part of governance. Not hidden, not polite. Fear was public service. Executions weren't quiet or solemn affairs imposed on a reluctant public. They were popular, hugely so. People travelled miles. Taverns advertised viewing spots. Vendors sold food, drink, pamphlets and souvenirs. Children attended. Pickpockets worked the crowd, sometimes even during hangings for theft. Why? Because executions weren't just punishment, they were drama. You had a story, the crime, a villain, the condemned, a ritual, the procession, a climax, the hanging, and a moral ending, order restored. In an age with limited entertainment, this was spectacle on a national scale. And yes, people laughed. Sometimes the condemned joked. Sometimes the rope failed. Sometimes the crowd jeered. Sometimes they cheered. This wasn't cruelty in a modern sense. It was familiarity with death in a harsher world, and a culture trained to see suffering as instruction. The crowd wasn't passive. It was part of the performance. Executions depended on public reaction. A calm crowd confirmed authority. A rowdy crowd was a risk, but also proof that the event mattered. Sometimes the crowd turned sympathetic. If the condemned spoke well, prayed loudly, or appeared humble, the mood could shift. Tears replaced cheers. The lessons blurred. That terrified authorities, because once people empathised with the condemned, the execution stopped reinforcing power and started questioning it. Was this justice or cruelty? Not all deaths were equal. Public executions overwhelmingly targeted the poor. Theft, forgery, poaching, crimes of survival filled the gallows. The wealthy rarely swung. This mattered. Watching executions trained the public to associate poverty with criminality. The crowd didn't just learn obedience, it learned hierarchy. The message wasn't simply don't commit crimes, it was know your place. And the crowds absorbed it until they didn't. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, something shifted. Crowds grew larger, louder, and less predictable. Executions became carnivals that sometimes undermined the very authority they were meant to reinforce. People got drunk, they mocked officials, they treated death casually, or worse, joyfully. Reformers began to worry. What if executions were brutalising society instead of disciplining it? If watching death made people more violent, less moral, less respectful, then the spectacle was backfiring. And once that idea took hold, public executions became dangerous, not morally, but politically. The solution wasn't mercy at first, it was privacy. Executions were moved inside prisons, out of sight, out of earshot. The body still died, but the crowd was removed. Punishment became quieter, bureaucratic and procedural. The state learned it didn't need cheering crowds anymore. It needed legitimacy. And legitimacy came not from fear, but from appearing humane. That was the real moral U-turn. Now that Britain suddenly valued life more, but that it realised spectacle was no longer respectable. Here's where I'd love your thoughts. Do you think public executions stopped because society became more compassionate, or because the state found a cleaner, less embarrassing way to control power? Put your views in the comments. I read them and they often shape how I approach future episodes. We didn't stop watching punishment, we just stopped calling it entertainment. Today, punishment is hidden behind walls, legal language and euphemisms. The spectacle didn't vanish, it moved. From the scaffold to the courtroom, from the crowd to the headline, and from public death to public judgment. So when we ask why public executions were entertainment, the real question might be, what do we still watch and tell ourselves is different? Thanks for walking a little further down the path that made Britain with me. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that. And if you subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue of videos similar, like this one that YouTube's chosen. Have a look. I think you'll like it. So take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.